Let's see if that worked. Okay, so that one. Okay, and that's telling me I'm on. Right. Okay. Now we appear to be happening. Finally. All right. Okay. I'm almost there, guys. I'm almost there. I don't know what happened. This thing is completely puzzling and totally stupid. Okay. Are we there? Are we happening? Apparently so. Okay, so hello, I am here. You there? I'm here. Okay, let's bring people off to the old new stream. Okay. Bum, bum, bum. Right, okay. All right, well, I'm going to have to open another. Somebody explained to me why I shouldn't explode. Never mind. Never mind. I'm not happy. Okay. This is a ridiculously complicated process to go through just to get a single live thing on the air. Okay. Now let's see what happens. Oh, I bet you I can just post the new. Oh, God. Okay. Okay, we shall hope that that does it. God, how did that come up? Ah! Okay, okay, good. There, we got it. Oi! So, ladles and jungle gyms, step right up. Welcome to my latest reading podcast. No, it's not a podcast. Live, whatever it is. It's called "Does This Webcam Make Me Look Fat?" Yes, hi, I'm here. I apologize for all the craziness. Alexis, I hope you're still around. I'm sorry you've had a suck day. My deepest apologies. Hi, Ronnie. Hi, Mahmoud. Hello, Svan. Hello, Wouter. Hello, Brent. Hello, Jeremy. And Dirk. Hello, Dirk. Hello, J. Bear Bell and Paul. Hello, Brent. Okay. Um, okay, good. I think I've made sense out of it. I still don't know what happened. I started the first one and it never showed up. As soon as I start, I always have to go and check to make sure it's showing up on the Facebook page, since that's the principal place where it's being broadcast from. But it was not, and it was not, and it was not, and it was not, and I couldn't make any sense of it. It wasn't the problem from the last time, or the previous, whenever that was. It wasn't the privacy setting. I'd already fixed the privacy setting. So, yeah, and I'm one of those old people who actually knows stuff about technology. That's the frustrating thing. I mean, like I worked at Apple Computer. Admittedly, the computers were still powered by steam pistons at that point, but it was okay. Um, it still, I mean, I should know how this stuff works. I even had some more music this time, and it just got completely obliterated, of course, because by the time I was opening 7 or 8 windows all at the same time to figure out what was going on, I just turned it off because it was bothering me. Hello, Christine. How are you? Brent, are you in Japan, Brent, or are you just saying in Japan because it sounds cool, like big in Japan? We're big in Japan. I'll have to tell you that story about the time I met the guy from the band UFO in the San Francisco airport once and had a long chat with him. Hi, Jacqueline. How are you? Is it Jacqueline, as we sometimes say in the UK? Anyway, Jacqueline, you can let me know, and then next time I'll remember and get it right. So anyway, I'm here. I think we've got it figured out. People are on board. We seem to know what we're doing. Hi, Elva. So we will go ahead. Good Lord. What a palaver. It's just Diet Coke, by the way. It's in a weird bottle, but that's just because we had a big jug of it in the fridge instead of the usual cans. So, yes, thank you, Cliff. That is very accurate. Brent, where in Japan? You're going to have to tell me. I'm very interested. I've never been to Japan. I've never been any closer than oh God, what is it called? Tokyo's airport. It starts with an N. It'll come to me. Narita Airport. Anyway, that's the closest I've been to visiting Japan. I'd love to go to Japan someday. Okay, so we are reading again tonight. I apologize for starting late. Well, I didn't. I was on time till everything went wacko snacko. But I am going to read more from War of the Flowers. What you may or may not remember from last time is that Theo has come through into the world of fairy, which is dominated by the fairies that look the most like humans, which are known as the flower families. They're the well-to-do families. They mostly are named after different flowers. He and his tiny friend Applecore, the fairy who brought him through, have escaped from a horrible thing that has been sent after Theo, but they're still traveling across some very dangerous lands, and to escape and to get to the Daisy Lands, that's the name of the larger clan that is one of the powerful clans in fairy. To get to the Daisy Clan lands, they have to get across a river, and Theo barely survives his trip across the river, but I'm pretty sure I read that part, and he doesn't actually know. Last he remembers, he's kind of drowning. And then we read a section called The Disturbance in the Forcing Shed, which is where a young scion of the Thornapple family picked a fight with a humble goblin who was just trying to earn a meal in a roadside tavern. And then all the lights went out, and when they came back on, the young Thornapple heir, one of the flower families, was dead, and the goblin was gone. And that also tied into the thing we'd read earlier about Streety Nettle, the runaway capacitor. But if you're following it in sequence, you probably know that. But I know not everybody can do it. Anyway, so that's where we are, and Theo is now in fairy, although he doesn't really know what else is going on yet. So now I'm going to finally read. Hooray! Chapter 12, The Hollyhock Chest. As consciousness sluggishly returned, all Theo could remember at first was what seemed an odd dream in which he had been a sack of potatoes. No, a sack of wet potatoes, and a sack being handled rather roughly at that. He kept his eyes closed and tried to figure out where he was. The bed was big and soft, so it wasn't the cabin, but he didn't live with Kat and her quilts on top of quilts fetish anymore, unless the breakup had also only been a dream, like the potato sack nightmare. Wait a second. He had been a wet potato sack carried by a two-legged elephant, and there had been a bumblebee flying around his head talking to him in a funny little buzzy voice, all of which meant absolutely nothing, except that it had obviously been a really weird dream. Hold on. Buzzing, flying, fairyland, apple core. The whole grotesque adventure came flooding back as Theo's eyes popped open. A huge white comforter was draped over his legs, and beyond that was the footboard of a large wooden bed. Good, so far. But beyond the footboard sat a gray, lumpy person, the size of an industrial refrigerator. Theo gasped and yanked the comforter over his head. A voice like someone dragging a manhole cover down a cobblestone street bellowed, "Oi! Ted! Tell the boss he's awake!" It was comforting not being able to see, because the large gray person he had been looking at just before he had made the swift decision to pull the covers over his head and pray it would go away had not been a comforting thing to observe. "You can come out, Pinky." The voice was so deep and rough that just being in the same room with it made his kidneys hurt. "I'm a vegetarian." "No, you're impossible," said Theo, but without much conviction. The thing laughed. "Funny, Pinky. Come on out. The boss will be seeing you in a moment. You might want to leak out some fluids or whatever you lot do after you wake up." "Just because I look at it doesn't mean I have to believe in it," Theo reassured himself. He slowly inched down the covers until the top halves of both his eyes were exposed. The commitment made, he did his best not to squeak with fear. The thing next to the bed gave the old playground expression, "but ugly," a whole new meaning. Is this what my life's going to be like from now on? Just one horrible, weird thing after another? That sucks for days. The predominant color of the thing's bumpy, wrinkled skin was indeed gray, but not a simple gray. It held a complicated array of hues with strange undertones, like the exterior of an anciently decrepit concrete building left to weather and collapse. A gray that suggested the kind of walls where graffiti had been painted over and then re-graffitoed in a continuous cycle for about 1,000 years. The thing's face, however, made the rest of its gnarled hide look positively kissable. Its eyes were just tiny little points of red light deep under brows, so heavy someone could have tended bar from behind one of them. Between them was a formless gob of lumpy, crusty gray stuff that could only be called a nose because it had nostrils, and because it was more or less in the center of the thing's face. The mouth was open, displaying a grin so jagged and horrifying that Theo's fingers involuntarily tightened on the quilt again. The bald, gray, gruesomely massive thing was sitting cross-legged on the floor beside the bed, but even so, its head was at least 5 feet above the ground. It must, he guessed frantically, weigh as much as a medium-sized car. "Hello," it grated, and leaned toward him, batting eyelids like folk art saucers. Its breath was what might more properly have been expected out of the southern end of a triceratops. "My name's Dolly. You know, you're kind of cute for a pink boy." He was fanned awake the second time by the wind from tiny wings. Whoever was standing on his chin was saying angrily, "It's not funny, you bloody ogre. If I'd been here, I'd have flown up your nose and gone on a 3-month search for your brain just so I could kick it back out your nostril." "Oh, mulch," the deep voice said grumpily. "It was just a joke. They're such frail things." He's been through a lot. The fanning stopped. Come on, boyo. Wake up. Theo opened his eyes. And don't look up my skirt, you rude shite. With a flick, she flew up from his chin and back a yard, forcing him to sit up, groaning, so he could see her. The massive gray thing was still sitting on the floor, but it looked a little chastened. It was no wonder he'd mistaken it for an upright elephant in his first dream. Hold on, he said. How did I get here? Did you carry me? He paused. And is your name really Dolly? Close as you'll get to saying. And she belched out a gnashing, grinding noise that made Theo's kidneys ache again. So might as well be Dolly, yeah. I carried you. My brother Teddy Bear took a turn, too. Teddy Bear? That's how ogres name themselves, Applecore told him. They get their names as kids, called after their favorite toy. But before you get all sentimental, her brother's teddy bear was a full-grown live bear that he eventually squeezed to death by accident. And Dolly, well, boyo, you don't ever want to know what she used for a doll. No, I don't. He looked around as much as anything else to avoid looking at gigantic gray Dolly, who was grinning again. Except for his leather jacket reassuringly draped over one bedpost, everything around him was a bit odd and unfamiliar. It was a good-sized room full of tasteful little details of the kind that might be found in an upscale bed and breakfast. Theo and Kat had stayed in one in Monterey once, and Theo had been amazed how much money you could charge to let someone sleep in your spare room if you had a vase of cheese straws on the mantelpiece and a needlepoint of an otter on the wall. This room had soft, shimmering cloth hangings on the wall and very little ornamentation except for an upright wood and glass object on the bedside table. He guessed it was a clock radio, even though its face was triangular and there seemed to be more unreadable symbols on it than the numbers on a standard clock. But unlike the Monterey bed and breakfast, or in fact most rooms that fell into the category of guest room, as opposed to cell, this room had one door and no windows or vents of any kind, although something that looked a bit like an air conditioner with a covering screen made of silk was sunk into the stones of one wall. Air conditioners in fairyland. He couldn't wrap his head around it at all. Where am I exactly? He asked. What happened? You jumped into the river, she said, and you didn't even ask first. Ask? What do you mean ask? You told me to do it. There were people chasing after me. But they hadn't been people, of course, he remembered. They had been angry fairies. That was part of the problem. Not ask me. You don't go jumping into someone's river without getting permission, Applecore said sternly. Ignorance is no excuse. Look at your arm. No, the other one. He stared. Tied around the base of his left wrist was a single strand of wet green grass. He tried to slide it off, but it wouldn't move. He couldn't unpick the knot either, and the grass was as unbreakable as some kind of space-age carbon fiber. It's not going to come off. You should be grateful you got away so lightly, boyo. That's a nymph binding, and it means you owe a powerful favor. I had to work hard to bargain that, so they didn't just drown you, or worse. Worse? No more questions? I'll explain later. Just be glad that the Delphinian and Daisy commune people got together a while back and chased all the Jenny Greenteeths out of that river, or you'd be, well, best not to dwell on it. Your Jenny doesn't haggle like the nymphs do, just starts chewing. Now get up. He looked from the band of preternaturally strong river grass to the hovering fairy. It was plain that as long as he was in this damned fairyland, he'd never, ever get the kind of answers he wanted to anything. He'd just have to try to catch up on the run. I still don't know where we are, Applecore snorted. The only place you could be without being dead right about now, she said. This is Tansy's house in the Daisy family compound. The Sun's Gaze commune. I told you we were coming here. Bit mad is our boss, Dolly said.
Tansy likes lost causes and whatnot, oddities and so on, mortals.
I wouldn't go so far as to say he likes them, said Applecore, but he wanted this one, so we're off now.
Dolly shrugged. You can take him. I made sure he wasn't carrying anything he shouldn't before I put him to bed.
She gifted Theo with another leeringly jagged smile, and for the first time he realized he wasn't wearing his jeans and shirt anymore, but instead something halfway between pajamas and a martial art costume made of a slithery grayish silk.
You're smooth all over, aren't you? Said Dolly. I like that. Novelty, I call it.
Theo was still shuddering as he followed Applecore out into a broad, carpeted corridor. He pulled on his leather jacket, which he had snatched off the bedpost on the way out. It looked strange with the silk ninja pajamas, but at least it was something familiar. In truth, though, not everything seemed as strange as he had expected. The soft, fur-lined boots that had been thoughtfully placed by his bed felt quite pleasantly ordinary. The walls on either side of him seemed nothing more exotic than pale, sandy stucco, and although the light fixtures set at intervals along the passage were intricately ornamented, the lights themselves seemed to be electric bulbs? He asked Applecore. Is there really electricity here in Fairyland? I can't say I ever could make sense out of electricity when anyone tried to explain it, but no, these lights are scientific. They work by magic. Theo still felt like his brain wasn't entirely connected, but couldn't help wondering why his uncle's book had described a kind of gaslight or even oil lantern version of Fairyland, something like Victorian London. Instead, from what he could see of the quite modern decor and appliances, Eamon Dowd seemed to have gotten the similarities wrong by a good 100 years or more. I'm tired of weird stuff, he realized. I just want to go home. I'll go along and meet this old Tansy fellow, the one who likes mortals, and I'll answer some questions. Maybe he wants Uncle Eamon's book. In a sudden panic that it might be lost, he groped at his jacket pocket, but however intrusive the rest of Dolly's search might have been, she had at least left his great-uncle's journal. So I'll meet this Tansy guy, give him the book if he wants it. It's not worth staying here to keep it, that's for sure. And then I'll get him to send me home. For a moment, he could even imagine that things would be different for him now, after such experiences. I'll change. I'll get my life together. Maybe I'll even write a novel and get famous, use Great Uncle Eamon's ideas and what I've seen myself. How hard can it be to write one of those fantasy books anyway? Theo was interrupted in these creative musings when another large, heart attack-inducing figure stepped out of the shadows at the end of the hall. The floor gave a little under its weight.
Hello, Nat,
it rumbled. Don't get cute, you massive shower of gray shite, said Applecore, but almost fondly. We're here to see your boss. Teddy Bear, who was even less attractive than his sister, if such a thing were possible, nodded his huge head.
He's expecting you. Go right in.
He looked at Theo.
And don't do anything stupid, Pink Boy. I took you out of the river, and I can put you back in. From here.
Theo hastened after Applecore into a sparsely furnished antechamber, something that looked like it might have been designed by an unusually artistic Trappist monk. He looked over his shoulder to make sure they were alone before asking, Are all ogres like those two? No, not really. Applecore settled onto his shoulder. The big ones you don't even want to have in the house. Really dreadful they are. She reached over and pinched his earlobe. You know, I think Dolly's a bit fond of you. Shut up. Just shut up. A stranger walked into the room, a tall, slender man, apparently in his 30s, with a long white lab coat and a long white ponytail. He looked Theo up and down coolly, then turned away. Come along, he called over his shoulder. Who the hell is that? Theo whispered to Applecore, who still rode his shoulder. Count Tansy, of course. You best get on with it. But he's not. What had he been expecting? Old? Kindly looking? Just because Applecore had once referred to him as some kind of a doctor? Tansy led them out of the formality of the antechamber and into something much more chaotic. To Theo's first startled glance, it looked like the early days of computing, of that time which he knew only from photos and magazine articles when people had mounted their first-generation PCs in handmade wooden boxes, before such things had been replaced by mass-produced plastic cases. On second glance, the technology seemed more sophisticated than that, with unrecognizable machines stacked on every surface in the room, although there did seem to be rather an emphasis on attractive wooden cases, not to mention controls of fluted glass instead of workaday buttons and switches. Tansy stopped at one of the tables and picked up a pair of spectacles, which he donned before turning around to inspect Theo again. The lenses made the fairy's violet eyes seem larger, but did not make him seem any more like a kindly old inventor. Rather, they gave him the look of some kind of trendy European conceptual artist, which was in keeping with the techno-minimalist decor. The clothes he wore under the white lab coat, and now that Theo looked at it, it seemed a bit stylish for a lab coat, were also white. In his hawk-faced way, he was quite handsome, even beautiful. He looks like the angel that tells you you're not getting into heaven because you didn't make a reservation, Theo decided. He extended his hand, feeling awkward. Hi, I'm Theo Vilmos. Yes, you are. Tansy nodded once and ignored the hand until Theo curled it away again. He turned to Applecore, who had sprung from Theo's shoulder and settled on one of the polished wooden surfaces, legs dangling. You are a week late, Sprite. What happened? A week late? Theo looked down at his grass-bound wrist. Jesus, was I unconscious that long? No, couldn't have been. Did it take Applecore an extra long time to reach me in the first place? As she launched into a highly technical explanation of their encounter with the corpse thing and their arrival in Larkspur territory, using words like outflow and trajectory and proximate entry shift that didn't seem like they belonged in a magical trip to fairyland kind of situation, Theo could not help noticing that his tiny guide's demeanor had changed. She was all business now, perhaps even trying a little too hard, flinging technical terms around like a roadwork foreman, explaining to a company VP why his crew had accidentally put a jackhammer through a power cable. Yes, well, Tansy dismissed the rest of the explanation with a flick of his long fingers. He looked at Theo again, not angrily, but certainly not with a great deal of human warmth either, as if Theo was a guest's dog rather than an actual guest. In fact, after all the trouble of getting him here, Tansy hadn't really spoken to him yet. Human warmth. That's the key, isn't it? Theo decided. He's not human. And I don't even think he likes humans very much. And if this purple-eyed fellow was one of the sympathetic ones, Theo had a sudden chilling premonition of what it might be like to encounter some of the more unsympathetic of Tansy's folk. Well, so I'll never be Fairyland's Mr. Popular. Why did you bring me here? He asked. Tansy raised an eyebrow, thin and white as a line of high-test cocaine. Because I was the only one who could find you. Theo puzzled over this for a moment. That doesn't really answer my question. Wait until I finish with the sprite. The lord of the manor turned back to Applecore. Is there anything else important you need to tell me? Bunches, I'm afraid. She lifted off the tabletop and hovered, looking a bit weary. First, that dead bodies thing. I'll still be following him. If it found him there, it'll find him here. Tansy looked over the top of his spectacles. I hope you're not suggesting I couldn't puzzle that out for myself. Of course not, Count Tansy. Right. Well, also, when we were leaving Larkspur's land, the lad here went into the creek. That's why I had to fly straight here and get Dolly and Teddy to bring him home. The creek? You mean the Grey Window? It's strange that the nymph gave permission. Oh, she didn't? Not exactly? Not at first? Applecore flew over and tugged Theo's left hand up so Tansy could see his wrist. I had to let him be bound? The fairy lord shrugged. The mortal's affair, not mine. But it will affect how he travels, sir. Tansy shrugged again. He may not. Finish your recitation. Well, and when we bumped into Larkspur and his hunting party, I had to use my own charm because I used up all yours earlier scuffling with that ugly thing. It wasn't much, just a small and secret. Once in thrice misdirection, I got through a friend's discount, but it was my last bit of protection, so I'm without defenses, sir, if you see what I mean. I'll see you compensated, of course. Hang on for a moment, Applecore said, then flushed. Theo could see it even from a few feet away. Sorry for interrupting, sir. Sorry, I just realized a moment ago you said he may not. What does that mean, if you don't mind my asking? May not what? Tansy looked like he did mind her asking, at least a little, but couldn't be bothered to make a point of it. May not travel. You see, things have changed. How so? Applecore moved a little closer to Theo, hovering almost protectively, he thought. As I may or may not have explained to you, I did not want this mortal for myself, but because certain others wished me to summon him. Tansy turned and moved to a low chair, settling himself into it with remarkable grace. For the first time, Theo noticed that this important fairy had no wings, nor had any of Larkspur's hunting party had them. Now that he thought of it, hadn't Eamon Dowd written something about the upper crust fairies and their wings? He was wanted at a conclave in the city, Tansy continued, a meeting of some of the most important leaders of both the symbiotes and the coextensives. Applecore flew close to Theo's ear. Those are the creepers and the in-betweeners. The groups are against the chokeweeds, she whispered. Tansy frowned. He obviously had sharp hearing. I must say, I deplore those oversimplified names. It is the worst kind of common goblin talk. He shook his snowy head in irritation. Besides, we coextensives are not in-betweeners, a poor choice between two more dynamic parties. Rather, it is that the other two parties who tend toward extremist positions, and we are the moderate and sensible majority on which society depends. In a strange way, he seemed the most human Theo had yet seen him. A bit of color had even crept into the skin stretched over his pale cheekbones. In any case, some of my fellow coextensives felt it was important that this mortal be brought here. Theo Vilmos. I have a name. I'm not just this mortal. Another wave of the hand. That Master Vilmos be brought here. And although I am a busy person with many important projects, they convinced me to help. I was to bring you, here, and one of the young fellows of the Hollyhock household, a prominent symbiote family, and good folk despite a certain political naivete, was to come here and escort you to the conclave. But what happened? Applecore asked. Have they cancelled this meeting or some such? Tansy shook his head. He sat silently for the space of a dozen or so heartbeats, then rose from the chair and walked over to a surface covered with wooden boxes, whose shimmering screens were unlike those on any electronic device Theo had ever seen, as though they were not solid at all, but some kind of vertical liquid. Tansy moved his fingers slowly over one of the boxes, and the screen rippled and glowed. Then he closed the lid. Although he didn't much like Tansy, Theo had to admit these fairies were fascinating to watch. As with the folk in the hunting party, every gesture Tansy made, even the most apparently spontaneous, seemed like something choreographed and practiced. It's like they've been in some kind of applied gracefulness crash course since the second they were born. Finished with his first task, the tall fairy pulled open a drawer, then lifted out a silver box the size of a hard-bound book and put it on the tabletop. Applecore buzzed over to examine it. After a moment's hesitation, Theo walked over to join her. This was delivered yesterday, said Tansy. The Tommyknocker who carried it was one of the workers from the mine on the far side of our estate. He did not recognize the fairy who gave it to him and bade him bring it here to me. In fact, the knocker said no one had ever seen this stranger within the bounds of the commune. The box was an ornate thing, a silver chased with designs of birds and tree branches. In the center of the lid was an emblem of a round flower with overlapping petals. "That's the hollyhock crest, doesn't it?" Applecore asked. Tansy nodded. "It is, but I don't think it was sent by the family of the young man who is coming for Master Vilmos. Look." Tansy lifted the box's lid, unleashing a waft of spicy smells that held a faint acridity beneath. Inside, nestling on white petals, was a small object the size of a child's fist, wrapped in red paper. "It's a heart," Tansy said, "dried and stuffed with rue." He gave a short, sour laugh, but his face was turned away, and Theo could not see his expression. "I rather think that means we shouldn't expect your escort, don't you? At least not any more of him than this." Good God, the way he said it! Like he didn't care. Theo sat on the edge of the bed. His legs were still trembling. Like it meant nothing. Applecore was perched on top of the screen that looked like part of an air conditioner, vibrating gently. "They're not like us normal folk, those flowers," she said, then looked up. "What am I saying? You're not like us normal folk either." It was almost as hard for Theo to accept the casual way Tansy had dismissed him as it was to have found out that one of the few people in this whole mad world who seemed to have a vested interest in his safety was dead before Theo had even had a chance to meet him. "This all just sucks. What am I supposed to do now?" "Don't know. He'll talk to you again this evening," he said. "Don't push him, Theo. That's my advice. They're a mad shower, the flower folk. You can't hurry them after anything." "But what about me? I didn't want to come here. What am I supposed to do now?" He stood up and began to pace. "What about sending me back? Can you do that?" She shook her head. "Can't. Can't or won't." His voice was rising, even though a part of him was ashamed to realize he was shouting at a woman the size of a salt shaker. "Doesn't anyone here care that I've just been snatched out of my normal life without anyone asking me? Just kidnapped, for Christ's sake?" Dolly stuck her huge blunt head in through the door. "You're hurting my ears, Pinky. Sit down and talk nice." He sat down, clenching his teeth. He might be angry, but he was not stupid enough to argue with a couple of 1,000 pounds of bone and gristle that, according to Applecore, could run faster uphill than most mortals could sprint downhill. The little fairy came over and lit on the blanket beside him. "I'm sorry for how things have turned out, but don't go confusing the facts. I didn't kidnap you. I opened a door without explaining it because Tall, Dark, and Crumbly was going to suck the marrow out of your bones, probably without even taking off the meat first. I didn't fetch that thing down on you either. It was coming on its own. And when you went through that door, fella, I didn't drag you." He stared at her for a moment, then let his face sink into his hands. "You're right. I'm sorry. It's just..." He sat up. "Look, just talk to me. Maybe we can figure something out. Why can't you send me back to my home? If I stay here, won't that thing find me, that zombie? You're better off here, to tell you the truth. Tansy's got defenses. Besides, it's not that easy just sending you back. It takes a lot of power, especially when you don't want anyone to notice. Even without the Clover effect, getting someone through to the other world, it's like building some big complicated ship. Takes a long time, a lot of work. But you did it all once already. Because he arranged it. I don't think I could do it by myself, even if I had a trip left. I'm not a scientist like Count Tansy. If he's a scientist, it must be the Dr. Mengele kind. The kind that thinks of people as lab rats." He considered for a moment. You said before that he couldn't go, and that's why he sent you. Why?" That's the clover effect, named after some experimenting flower fella. It's been so ever since we lost the king and queen of fairy. We used to be able to go back and forth whenever we wanted, though there were some places that were easier for it than others. Now we can only go through to your world and come back here once apiece. She sat down on the comforter and combed her reddish hair out of her eyes with her tiny fingers. That's our exemption, we call it. That one trip. Work's coming from your side, too. Unless you're pure spirit, like that thing that tried to kill you, that is. They can pretty much go wherever they want, and then get their meat from wherever they end up. But the rest of us can't. So you need someone like Tansy or his friends to get you back home. So I just have to sit around here and hope that your boss has enough magical oomph to keep that monstrosity away from me until he decides what to do with me. More or less. Sorry. Theo slumped back against the headboard of the bed. So what are you doing working for someone like this Tansy guy? Ah, grew up here on the commune. Why is it a commune anyway? Commune's where everybody's equal or something. Seems to me like the whatever you call them, the flowers are in charge here like everywhere else. It's just a name from something back in the old days. The Daisy family. Used to be radicals back during the first unusual era. They liked tradition no matter what, so they kept the name. So you live here? Not really. I live in the city now, but my family mostly are still here. We apples have the freeholding of an orchard, and everyone who's at home works in it. Even Pip and Seed, my two closest brothers, and they always said they were going to run away because they hated it. Your family owns an orchard. Not the land, but like I said, we've got the freehold on the trees. 10 acres worth, she said proudly. 1,000 trees and more. Oh, he nodded. What kind of trees? She rolled her eyes. My name's Applecore. My dad's name is Applewood. Ma's called Applebough. I got brothers and sisters named Pip, Seed, Skin, Blossom. To mention a few, one of them's even called Apple Butter. So what kind of trees do you think they are? Oh, yeah, I get it. Quick as a hummingbird's hind end, aren't you? He scowled. Thought I told you to give me a break. How did someone so little get to be so damn snippy? Is it some fairy thing? Did your mama dip you in the nasty river when you were a baby or something? She laughed. One to you, boyo? You didn't finish explaining why you're working for Tansy. Ah, well, his cousin, Zany and Daisy, is the lord of the manor here on the commune, at least as far as being the one with the seat in Parliament. He's the one who grants our freehold. But they're a tricksy lot, these Daisies, still sort of free thinkers by flower standards, and they all share in running the place or doing whatever else interests them. Zanian's sister, Dispernia, actually makes most of the decisions. Tansy's had me help him out before, mostly gathering herbs or other things. He's mad keen on science, but he's no herb wife. And I've run a few errands for him in the city, found books he was looking for, obscure charms, like that. I've had trouble finding much other work in the city, though. So when he asked me if I'd do this, well, the pay was good. But why didn't he send someone bigger? She scowled. Don't pretend you. I know what you're going to say. Goes to show what you know. That's why he sent me. The smaller the person going through, the less disruption, so the less power it takes to send him. I'll bet it still turned all the lights off here when I went, but... Theo sighed. So on top of everything else, sending me back is going to take some huge amount of power or something. It's not easy, she said. That's why they call it science. And I'm just totally screwed. A wave of misery washed through him. They said you never appreciated your hometown until you moved away. How about your entire world? Applecore looked at him for a long moment. Tell you what, she said. I'll go talk with him, with Tansy. He's really not a bad fella by flower standards. Theo gave her a bleak look. Yeah, probably hardly ever beats the servants to death or anything. Just quit feeling so sorry for yourself. Stay here and I'll be back in a bit. She rose from the bed and hung in the air for a moment, looking as though she wanted to say something more, but instead she turned and shot out the door in a fizz of swift beating wings. Bored and depressed, Theo got up and began pacing the narrow confines of the room, letting his hand trail along the hangings on the wall, which caressed his skin more like a liquid than like fabric. He stopped in front of the object that looked something like a clock and examined the strange glyphs arranged around the edges of its triangular face. It sure looks like a clock radio, he thought. I could listen to some music while I'm waiting. That would be interesting, wouldn't it? Listening to music invented on an entirely different world? He touched one of the small silvered bumps on the surface of the wood, but if it was a button, it didn't do anything obvious. He pressed another, then dropped the object onto the bed in surprise when a voice whispered out of it, asking what sounded like a question in a language he did not understand. The thing bounced a couple of times until it reached the end of its cylindrical cord. The whispering voice said nothing else. He waited a couple of minutes just to be sure, then picked up the clock radio, or whatever it was, in his hands and tried another button. At first he thought that this hadn't done anything either, until he realized that the wood was growing smolderingly hot beneath his fingers. He yelped and dropped it onto the bed again. A wisp of smoke arose from where it lay, so he jerked it up off the bed and held it by the cord. Shit! What do I do? He said to himself, out loud, always a bad sign. Old Tansy will love me if I burn down the family manor. The thing was growing hotter. He could feel it on his exposed skin, even with it dangling a foot away. In a growing panic, he shoved the bed a little bit away from the wall with his legs, so he could try to reach the outlet while keeping the clock safely away from anything flammable. It was a tight fit, and the clock thing swung toward him as he bent, rummaging awkwardly behind the bed, and bumped against his head. It felt like the time he'd picked up one of Kat's curling irons without noticing it was plugged in, and he let out a shriek of pain. He finally got a grip on the cord down near what looked like an outlet, a rectangle of pale wood set directly into the stone of the wall. He yanked, but the cord did not come loose. The clock swung near his head again and frizzed a lock of his hair into a crisp curl. He braced his hip against the bed and yanked again as hard as he could. The cord came away with a loud pop and a flash of greeny blue flame. For a moment he could see a round circle of teal fire still flickering on the outlet plate, and even the hole was gone, leaving nothing behind but smooth wood. He looked at the cord dangling in his hand. The ivory smooth knob at the end where it had connected to the outlet was as featureless as if it had just been sawn off the tip of an elephant's tusk. The clock, or whatever hellish device it might be, was already cool. Theo stuck his head out into the corridor. Applecore had been gone at least an hour, and he was getting crazy with restlessness. Tansy's lab, or whatever they'd call it here, was down that way, but Theo had no intention of dropping in on him and reinforcing the fairy's dislike of mortals by blundering in at an inopportune moment. He'd just go for a stroll in the other direction. It wasn't like he was a prisoner or anything, was it? Was it? He stood in the corridor, wondering why it seemed longer than it had when he had looked down it before. How big could this place be, anyway? Was it the main manor house for the Sunny Days commune, or whatever Applecore called it? Theo could only remember it. It sounded like some kind of organic dairy. Or was it a separate building? Well, finding a window could tell him something, and getting outside into the air would tell him even more. He glanced up at a bit of sky peeping in through the skylight. It felt like it should be late afternoon, and certainly the oblong of blue overhead looked like that was about right. Maybe I should leave a trail of crumbs or something, he thought, which reminded him that he hadn't eaten anything since he'd been in Fairy, nor had he drunk anything except river water, and most of that by accident. There's a destination, then, he decided. I'll hunt for the kitchen. Of course, it wound up being a lot more difficult than it looked. The house, most of which seemed to carry on the spare white stucco and color accents look of the parts he'd seen so far, seemed not just large, but oddly unintuitive in the way it was laid out. Every time he thought he'd figured out how it worked, and expected to turn a corner and find himself back in a main corridor, like the one outside his room, he found himself standing instead at the edge of some kind of sunken living room with a pond and live trees growing through carefully laid out gaps in the floorboards, or at the door of a walk-in pantry whose shelves were lined with sacks and canisters. Some, or even all of these, might very well have contained food, but enough of them were jiggling by themselves on the shelf, or even making little squeaking noises, that he had no interest in closer investigation. What was even more odd was how some of the rooms disappeared right in front of him, or seemed to, especially those that had windows to the outside world. He would spot a wash of sky peeking through at the far end of a series of linked open rooms, but when he got to the last room, he would find himself looking into another corridor, with no window, or in fact anything remotely sky-colored in sight. Once he found a sort of parlor room with big, low couches that had a picture window covering one entire wall. He could see an expanse of forested green hill, its crest just touched by the last slanting rays of sunlight, the clouds beginning to turn salmon pink above it. But when he stepped into the room, the entire window was gone, replaced by a slab of polished black stone. Thinking it might be some kind of polarization trick, he stepped back to the entranceway of the room again, but although the light now gleamed very attractively off the polished surface, it was still opaque black. Are they trying to keep me from seeing out? Or someone else from seeing me? He could often hear people talking, but could never find any of them. Once he even thought he heard Applecore's clear, high-pitched voice behind a cloth hanging, as though she were in a room just on the other side, but when he swept it back, he found nothing but a wall of pale tiles. He heard voices that sounded like the slow, harsh cadences of the ogres, and other voices, stranger still, but they all seemed to float to him from no discernible direction. A few times he wondered if there might be some air conditioning ducts hidden in the wide wooden roof beams, piping not just air but sound from one part of the house to the other, but if such things did exist, they were hidden beyond his capacity to spot them. When the light suddenly dimmed and then went out, Theo had a moment of pure terror. He stopped, as rigid as a mouse when the cat door pops open. The darkness surrounded him like something tangible, something thick, but the abrupt, total silence was even thicker. No whispers, no dull, barely audible humming, just the silence of premature burial. He was suddenly all too aware that he was a stranger in a completely alien place. Do they have regular blackouts here? He didn't dare move. Or does it mean something worse? A picture from one of his childhood books came to him. Theseus in the dark labyrinth, unaware of the brute minotaur looming behind him. He had no idea how long it took until the lights in the hallway came up again, but it was longer than he would have liked. The renewal of the phantom voices was as comforting as hearing the kindly neighbors in the next apartment come home. The return of light and noise did not solve his other problems. He wandered on through rooms that would thrill the editors of Architectural Digest while confounding any actual architects, found singing shower fountains in bathrooms made of what seemed like living but unbarked wood, discovered carpets so thick that they seemed to cling to his feet as if unwilling to let him leave, and chattered to him in soft voices he could not quite make out. But he still could not find a kitchen, or his own room again, or in fact any other living souls that he could recognize as such. Panicked into a desperation beyond any fear of embarrassment, he stopped and began to shout, "Applecore! Applecore!" If that had truly been the sprite's voice he had heard earlier, through a solid wall, why shouldn't his own travel the same way? Apple Core! Where are you? Hello? Anyone? What do you want? Asked a voice, cool and collected as a stewardess reciting safety information to a plane load of bored commuters. Theo looked around, but except for a table with an ornamental tree in a rectangular vase, he was alone in the hallway. Where are you? He asked the tree, just in case. In the house. As far as he could tell, the calm voice came out of thin air. Do you need help? Yes, I think I do. Who are you? I am the Hob, the voice said. I live in the house. You are one of Count Tansy's guests. How can I help you? Jesus, was that all it took? I wish I'd thought of this earlier. Can you help me find my way? Like back to my room, if I wanted? Certainly. It seemed unimpressed, as though it were not quite worth its disembodied time to handle such simple requests. How about outside? Outside the house? Now that dainty voice sounded a bit irritated. I'm sorry, you can't leave the house without Count Tansy. Oh, well, that told him something anyway. Maybe a bit more than he wanted to know. How about the kitchen? Can you give me directions to the kitchen? You wish to walk there? Theo frowned. What are my alternatives? Rocket skates? Light rail? Yeah, if it's close, I'll walk. I could bring it to you, if you prefer. That just plain sounded weird. No, that's okay. I'll walk. Very well. Go forward until you reach the end of this hallway. Turn right, then turn right again immediately. Cool. Thanks. Enjoy your visit. He hadn't sensed her arriving, if that was what she'd done, but he did sense her going. It was an odd departure, something barely perceived, like a light going out in a building he'd been watching while thinking of something else. It's all magic, he thought. This whole world works on magic, and I don't understand any of it. Man, I'm in trouble here. And that is where we are going to stop. So, since we didn't start that late, and by the time I wrap up, we will be a bit past 3. I don't know why, but once again, this stupid thing lost its focus. Oh, and now it's coming back again, I think. I don't know. Technology. Anyway, so thank you for your patience. Sorry for those of you who had problems getting a hold of it. It looks like some people might have not been able to find it, but I'm not quite sure. If so, I apologize. I have no idea what's going on with these things. There's definitely some kind of weird thing built into Google Chrome that I'm going to have to figure out. Either that, or I'm going to have to go to Google and I'm going to have to find someone to shake down for information. My brother works there. Maybe they can sneak me in. Perhaps he could bring me in a duffel bag. My brother is a fairly sturdy young man. Well, he's not young anymore, but my brother is a sturdy younger man, and perhaps he could sneak me in. But I've got to figure this out because it's driving me nuts. Anyway, that said, my complaining and whining and whimpering done with. I just want to say once again, as always, thank you so much for joining me. Thank you for putting up with the occasional confusion and complexity of trying to make these very simple technological tools work in the way they're supposed to work. But I do appreciate it. And as always, I want to remind you, we are having a horrible resurgence of the pandemic here in the United States. And I'm sure, I know many of you overseas from me are having the same kinds of things going on. So we're all struggling with it, but I know I don't have to tell you folks, to be smart, to stay home, to wear masks, all that kind of stuff, because I happen to believe perhaps erroneously, but I don't think so. I happen to believe that most of my readers are smart enough people to understand that the time to stand up for your right not to wear a mask during a pandemic is about like standing up for your right not to wear a mask while, say, performing brain surgery or cleaning asbestos out of an old house, and that in fact your right not to wear a mask only stretches as far as you at home in your own house, and as soon as you go out and breathe on me and mine, that's a different issue. So that said, what I will say, since again I assume all of my readers and friends are all smart folk who don't want people to die, I will say thank you so much again, and continue, be good to yourself, be good to your friends and family and loved ones and simply people that you meet on the street. All of you masked and all of you appropriately distant. But especially anybody you know that is isolated or doesn't have any contact or not much contact with the outside world, which can happen for people. So if you know anybody like that, give them a call, give them a Skype, give them something, make some contact, because it's a tough time for a lot of folks. And all of us, even those of us who are extremely fortunate in our circumstances, are occasionally having tough times. But some folks have it really bad. Also, some people may need help just for shopping or whatever, and other people may just be lonely. So whatever you can do to alleviate the distress of those around you is an extremely good thing to do at a time like this. It is a bit like wartime, except we are fighting not a human enemy, but a disease. And we will win. We will have things back to at least a more normal state of affairs, but to do it, it's going to be tough, and it's going to be a tough winter. So help the people around you, please. Do what you can. Anyway, with that, I want to say thank you so much. I've already said that like 3 times, haven't I? Okay, I won't say thank you so much. I will just say come back if you can. Come back 7 p.m. when I will be reading more, starting right where I left off and reading some more. If you can't make that, you can always find it in recorded form, either here on Facebook, on my Twitter feed, on tadwilliams.com. That's all one word, Tad Williams. No spaces, Tad Williams. You have to say it just like that, tadwilliams.com. So you can find it there if you're missing parts of it and want to catch up. But otherwise, join me at 7 p.m. or join me next Sunday at the same time, which for me is 2 a.m. to 3 a.m. Pacific Standard. And I will see you. Okay. So from the Bill Williams Rancho Hilario, full of craziness and animals and people, and still